Hello, Polka fans. My name is Chris Bogdon, and I'm an IPA director from the state of Pennsylvania. I'm excited to be bringing you another interview in the IPA Interview Series. I'm here today with my boss, the leader of Polka Country Musicians, and the 2012 IPA inductee into the Polka Music Hall of Fame, Mr. Wally Dombrowski. How are you doing, Wally?
Doing pretty good, Chris.
It's been a long time since we actually got together in person other than these virtual meetings.
I know. And I know we've been getting together periodically and doing meetings with other fellow polka people online. And that's always, really good to reconnect with people as the weeks roll on. So that's been kind of a cool thing that we've been doing.
That has been fun. It's going to be good. I could just see right around the corner we're going to start getting together again. So hopefully that comes true.
Yeah, hopefully. I'm chomping at the bit, I'll tell you.
I think we all are. So, all right. So let's get started. So, Wally, tell us, how did you begin playing polka music?
Well, God, I mean, I've been listening and, I've been exposed to polka music actually ever since I can remember, literally. My parents were into the music as I was growing up, actually, even before I was born. They were both into polka music, and actually they would take, my brother Rich and my sister Lynn out to different dances. And then I came along and they kind of took a couple of years off in there. And actually, literally, my first exposure to polka music was I was still in the cradle. And I don't think I was about a week old. And my dad, back then, Polka Bration, which Dick Pillar used to run down at Ocean Beach Park. Back then, it was running about 10 days. And my dad had gotten a schedule, and he was looking at on Wednesday night in the ballroom, there was this guy, Happy Louie, who was playing. And my father had never heard of Happy Louie, didn't know anything about him, but for whatever reason, he was talking it over with one of his other relatives, and they decided to go down on that Wednesday night to go see Happy Louie. And Wednesday nights, traditionally, that was Happy Louie night at Polka Bration. Any other evening in the ballroom at New London down at Ocean Beach, you had at least two bands playing. Wednesday night was just Happy Louie for 5 hours, and the place would be packed. So my father had gone down that evening to see him, and just was so taken just by Louie's performance and, just the charisma he had and the way he, livened up the crowd and everything. So he bought a bunch of Happy Louie albums. And he came home that night, and it was pretty late, probably close to midnight. And at that point, our family lived in an apartment. My grandparents lived downstairs from us, so we were up on the top floor. So my dad had came home and was so just psyched after seeing Happy Louie, decided that he wanted to listen to these records right now. So he had his stereo set up in the living room, and meanwhile I'm in the cradle just off of the living room in my parents' bedroom, soundly sleeping. And my dad just turns on the light in the living room, puts on the stereo, starts cranking the Happy Louie records. My mom wakes up freaking out and goes running into the living room and said, "Hey, don't forget, Wally's in the next room and you're gonna wake the baby." And so what ended up happening was they came and they checked on me, and I was sleeping soundly through it. So that was actually my first exposure to music, and I was probably a week and a half old.
Wow. Now, yeah. Did your parents play polkas, or were they musicians, or no?
Not really. My father I want to say it was in grade school, took up cornet. So he took lessons, I guess, for a year or two. But he was mostly into sports, into, softball and baseball and that kind of stuff. So after a while, I don't know if he just didn't have the patience for it, but he was always more geared towards doing stuff in the athletic realm. So back when he was younger, he would guess was into it for a little bit, but he then decided, no, I want to go do the softball thing, because that was more interesting for him when he was growing up.
Hmm. Now, did they encourage you to take up music, or how did you start playing an instrument, let's say?
Let's see. I was probably at the time 5 years old, and at this point, I was going with my family out to different polka events, mostly during the summer, like the summer picnics and all that. And there was one that we went to where Dick Pillar was playing, and in order to keep myself amused, here's this like 4 or 5 year old kid,
Yeah.
and I had those little like Fisher Price sand pails, and but that was basically my drum set. So instead of like just playing around, either the band would start playing and I would turn them over, and I had the hoe the
Mhm.
rake or whatever, and I'd sit there and bang the drums. And Dick Pillar was the one who came up to my parents at one point and said, "Hey, your kid is keeping time here with what the band's playing." And he was the one who kind of spotted, okay, this kid's got rhythm. And at that point, the conversation went on, and Dick actually asked at that point if I had any interest in any musical instrument.
Mhm.
And by this point, I had seen Happy Louie a number of times, and I had a toy trumpet. Anytime Louie would be playing, I'd have to pick up the toy trumpet and all that. So I was pretty into trumpet at that point. And this was the summer before I went into kindergarten. So basically, Dick told my parents that, hey, if he's really interested in learning trumpet, um, why don't you have him start kindergarten and all that? And a couple months in, you know, why don't you come and I can, teach him. And at that point, my brother was interested as well. And actually, before this, my parents were actually looking into other trumpet teachers in the area. But the whole thing was, I was, about 5 years old. I had just turned five or something like that. So when my parents started inquiring, to these other trumpet teachers, the trumpet teachers all said, "Yeah, that's really nice. He's a 5 year old kid. He needs to physically develop more." So they weren't going to touch me until I was at least like 9 or 10 years old. So when Dick had volunteered and said, "Hey, bring him down to me," that was like, my parents were so thankful for that, because no other trumpet teacher in the area at that time was going to take on a student that was going to be as young as like 5 years old.
Mhm. Interesting. Okay. So then trumpet was your first instrument.
Yeah, and like I said, I started probably like in the fall when I was in kindergarten, and
Okay.
actually that's about the time that my brother had started trumpet as well. He, I think, did take lessons at one point when he was in grade school, and this might have been like sixth, seventh, eighth grade. But the teacher, I guess, really wasn't into teaching the kids, and he learned a little bit, but not all that much. So when uh, Dick had, mentioned to my parents, "Hey, I'll teach Wally," Rich was interested at the same time, so he decided to jump on board, and we both started taking lessons at the same time.
Got it. Now, so when did you pick up concertina? Because wasn't concertina, was it shortly after that?
Actually, yeah. Um, I remember the first time I ever saw, I think, a concertina. I think it was probably like about 4 years old, maybe five, and I want to say like maybe 4 years old. And actually, the first band I ever saw with a concertina live was actually Marion Lush, and it was at Pulaski Park in Three Rivers, Massachusetts, and he had Jerry Darlick playing concertina. And Marion's band that day was basically the Tokars brothers: Richie on trumpet, Jerry on drums, and Lenny Bobrowski on bass, and Jerry Darlick was playing concertina. And looking at Jerry playing concertina, I was kind of looking at it like, "Ooh, that's interesting." But the bug didn't really grab me to start playing concertinas until I saw Jerry Darlick with the Versatones. That was probably like a year and a half, 2 years later.
Got it.
And, and at that point, I don't know, just something clicked in me, and I just started bugging my parents. I said, "Boy, that concertina, that looks really cool. Yeah, I really would like to learn how to play it." But I mean, back then, I mean, even nowadays, to try to find somebody who can actually, teach concertina. I mean, especially in New England at the time, because I mean, concertina players are few and far in between.
Yeah.
You could count maybe on, one hand how many concertina players there were, like in, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, actually all of New England.
Yeah.
So such an exotic instrument at the time. And really, it was like one of those things where my parents said, okay, you need to slow down here. You just started trumpet like, a year or so ago. And my parents started asking a couple other, musicians in the area how basically they should proceed with this. And, they got the advice of, okay, at his age, he's not going to probably be able to physically handle like a normal concertina.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of told my parents, you might want to look at getting like the smaller one, what they call the student model concertina, which is smaller, probably maybe half the size, not as many buttons. So the reed blocks don't weigh as much, kind of thing. And so we kind of worked out a bargain that, okay, my parents agreed to get me the student model, the smaller concertina. And if I can learn how to play that, then okay, they would look into possibly getting like the full size one. And so they did get me eventually the student model one, and I sat there for, I can't tell you how many hours, just left and right hand, and I
Mm-hmm.
guess sort of memorizing the pitches. That's the only way I could probably describe it, because at that point I think my parents were aware that I was blessed with very good ears, which is like another story how that happened. But so I started going through it, and I would sit there. I can remember sitting there like every day, just going through like each button, going in and out, and doing the pitches, and then eventually figuring out, okay, a G chord, let's say, and then an A chord or whatever, and like the D chord. And probably I would say after about 6 months, maybe a little bit less than that, because I remember sort of getting it, the student model concertina, like in the summertime, and then I started school up, so I didn't have a lot of time to really um, delve into it between trumpet lessons, school, and the concertina was sort of like a thing I picked up after like my schoolwork was done, my homework was done, and the trumpet, I practiced my trumpet lesson for the week, kind of thing. So, but I kept at it, and it really wasn't until I think Christmas vacation that I really, because I had all this extra time on my hands, that I really decided, okay, I'm going to try to figure this thing out. And by then I was like, I already knew the chords, I remember. And at that time, I remember the Versatones Honky Style Volume 2, I think had just come out. And of course, that album is all on the C concertina, which was the student model concertina I had. So I started putting on that album and just started kind of, fiddling around. Okay, what are the chords to this song? And then eventually, like I remember during that vacation, something clicked with me, and I was able to start playing, melodies on the right hand, kind of thing, and kind of putting it all together. And that was really my start as far as playing concertina goes.
So you never played with like the Silberhorn book, like most people did?
Not really. The book came with the concertina.
Okay.
I remember really, I would use that book just for the fingering chart in the front of the
Okay.
book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just
Okay.
look in, because I was already starting to read music, obviously, through trumpet lessons. So that end of it kind of helped. But I remember just studying the fingering chart, and then just going through and just doing the hands-on, okay,
Yeah.
this note is this going in, it's the same, this other pitch going out, kind of thing on each button, and just kind of going through that. And I remember that used to be like a daily ritual for me almost.
Well, since you mentioned it before, how did you find out you had a good ear?
This was an interesting little thing, because I had already started taking trumpet lessons. So I was already starting to read music. And then through Dick Pillar, there was a guy in Massachusetts, and actually anyone who's been in the polka music field for a number of years knows the name Ken Mori. He was this guy who was an arranger back in I guess in the in the 50s and 60s, and did a lot of arranging for, I guess, bands and stuff like that. Well, he went into this business of doing sheet music for polkas, and that's actually Dick Pillar, I do believe, turned us on to this Ken Mori, and he had a whole catalog, and you could get the catalog in the mail. It was sheet after sheet of the titles of the songs, the artists that had recorded it, kind of thing, and you could get sheet music. So I remember my brother started ordering some stuff from Ken Mori, and back then I think actually Dick kind of recommended like a few songs to get, like, and it was like more like the simple songs, like In Heaven There Is No Beer kind of thing, stuff that we could handle reading, and actually we'd bring it into the trumpet lessons as part of the lesson to kind of go through a Ken Mori chart to start reading that stuff. And at that point, I knew we were doing that. And there was one evening, I guess we were at home, and for whatever reason, my brother wasn't there. And my father ended up on the phone talking to my uncle. And I just decided to start doing my trumpet lesson. So I'm in the bedroom, and I did my trumpet lesson. And back then, I mean, other than polka music, I actually, growing up, I was exposed to a lot of different music because, my parents were into the polkas, my sister was into rock, and then my brother was into kind of a little bit of both. And he used to actually like to listen to Herb Alpert in the Tijuana Brass quite a bit. So at the end of kind of like going through my trumpet lesson, at this point, through the exposure of my brother listening to it, I had heard a lot of the Herb Alpert albums and stuff like that. So, something in me said, I can play this stuff because I can hear what's going on. So after I went through my lesson, I decided, well, let's put on a Tijuana Brass album. And I started playing with, Herb Alpert's lead parts.
Wow.
Meanwhile, my father is, in the kitchen, which was right off of our, my brother's and I bedroom. And, he's talking to my uncle, and my uncle's like, well, who's that playing in the background? I was like, oh, must be Rich playing with the Tijuana Brass album. And I guess earlier in the conversation, my dad had mentioned that, well, my brother's out that night. And my uncle had commented, well, isn't Rich not home right now? So, my father was like, well, yeah, you're right. So he's like, hold on a second. So he goes to the door and he opens up the bedroom door. He sees me playing to the Tijuana Brass album, no chart in front of me,
Wow.
and just blowing away. So at that point, he says to my uncle, he's like, I need to call you back. So I kind of hung up with him. So the song kind of ended, and he stuck his head through the door again, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I was like, like this 5-year-old kid is like, "Well, I'm playing, with the Tijuana Brass album." And of course, at that point, my father said, "Oh, well, how do you know what to play?" So, and I guess, being like a 5.5-year-old kid or whatever, I kind of like in my own way was kind of like letting him know that I can hear the pitches. I know what the valves to press on the trumpet are, so I can play along with this. And to me, it wasn't that big of a deal.
Wow.
And of course, my father kind of like blew him away, I think, because that had been the first time. And of course, you got to remember, it's like I'm not following any music either. I'm just playing along with the album, and it's like, I'm hitting these parts and like whatever, it's no big deal. And then come to find out, I guess, they had mentioned it to Dick Pillar, and he says, "Oh yeah, he has perfect pitch." So that was kind of like their, exposure into like, their son who, okay, I guess this kid has some musical ability at this point if he can hear different things and pick up on different things that are musically going on.
So at that point, you were destined to play music.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. And then of course, like I said, like right after that, like I think it was the following summer where I really started to want to get a concertina, and then learning how to play that. to, you know, a certain degree and actually, you know, getting a little bit proficient on that. And yeah, I think that was really a game changer where my parents kind of realized that, okay, he's learning how to play a concertina and without anyone giving him any kind of instruction or lessons on it. I mean, I get pointers from different players along the way, but there was no formal instruction involved at that point.
Nice. So around this time, did you ever play with other bands, or like how did polka country musicians begin? Like how did that transition go from being a musician to then start playing in polka country?
Well, yeah, at that point, my parent, like I said, they would go to dances, and of course by this time I'm going with them, even though, you know, it's the age difference between like my brother and sister and myself. And of course, you know, once Dick, I think, found out that I had the perfect pitch, he kind of reached out. I think it was one of like the first band leaders to kind of reach out and you know, ask my parents, hey, have the boys bring their trumpets and they can come and sit in.
Wow.
And I think after that, it's sort of like word started to spread in the area that there's, you know, this 5-year-old kid who's actually playing trumpets. So, you know, it went from like, you know, sitting in with on a few songs with like Dick Pillar's band to I remember sitting in with like bands like Heavy Chicago. And I mean, eventually, you know, Happy Louie then said, hey, why don't you come up and sit in? And I was just like, wow. Yeah, and I can remember once, well, back then, my dad used to sing the Onions polka with Louie. And I can remember there was this one time we were playing at this ballroom in Mendon, Massachusetts. I think back then it was called the Lakeview Ballroom, and then it changed its name to Myriad Ballroom, or vice versa. Place is packed. This ballroom was pretty big. And so he called my dad to sing Onions polka, and he's like, yeah, you guys get on the horns. And here we're thinking Louie's gonna, you know, we're gonna be playing with Louie. So then he turns around, he puts the horn down, and you know, my dad starts singing like the vocal intro, you know, "Tying so about," and Louie says, "Okay, you guys got it." Just walks. It's like, oh boy, here we go.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a way to thrust into playing polkas.
Yeah, that's a little trial by fire right there.
Exactly.
Especially, yeah, a place that's just packed with people, and there's a crowd in front of the stage, and that's an adrenaline rush for sure.
So when did you start polka country, or how did, like, was that shortly thereafter?
That was, yeah, I was a couple of years or a few years after that. Because that actually didn't start coming to pass until probably like, I want to say like the spring of 1977.
Okay.
And you know, my brother was the impetus behind it. Of course, he's, you know, the originator of the band. And you know, at one point, you know, he said, hey, I want to start a band up. And I pretty much just said, oh, okay. So I guess I was in at that point. And, you know, there were a couple, you know, local bands in the area, and actually one who, well, actually, he was a drummer, and actually people will know him because he was the originator of the Polka Jammer Network. His name was Polka Man Jack Pacheski. And he played drums, and actually a little bit before that, like maybe a year or two before that, a little known fact, he was actually, I think it's one of his first bands he was with was a band called the Jolly Aces. And I think they recorded, I think, a 45 maybe on Dick Pillar's Steljo record label. And then after that, I want to say he was with a band called Sounds of Chicago, which was actually a band I want to say that Richie Bernier had. And I can't remember if that was pre or post Dick Pillar's band. The timeline on that's a little bit hazy for me because I was pretty young. But Jack was playing or had played drums with Richie's band at that point. And so we kind of knew him. So when my brother was looking to form what eventually became Polka Country Musicians, one of his first phone calls was to Jack, who at that time really wasn't doing anything. He was kind of like a co-DJ with this other gentleman out of a local radio station. So we knew he was into polka music, and at that point he wasn't playing with anybody. And he kind of took an interest. It's like, yeah, it'd be kind of cool to start up a band with you guys. So that was sort of the nucleus. And actually through Jack is how we sort of were able to contact other people to see if they were interested in playing and start rehearsing and all that other stuff. So I want to say that whole process may have started like in April of 1977. We got together as, I think, 3-piece a couple times. And then after that, through Jack, we got, in contact with other people in the area, other musicians and stuff like that. And kind of, started doing rehearsals and different things and seeing if, these other guys were interested in playing with us and vice versa. And then I think it was, we finally got, 5 guys, because actually, ironically enough, polka country musicians actually started as a 5-piece honky band. And the instrumentation was trumpet, reed player, clarinet, sax, me on concertina, bass, and drums. And, as time went on, once we had the 5 guys sort of together, there was a local Polish club in Colchester, Connecticut. Actually, we played there, Chris, at the, we've done Oktoberfest in their pavilion.
Yep.
Well, during the summer, they really weren't running dances on Sunday afternoons. So Frank Zeleznicki, who is still involved with the St. Joseph's Polish Club today, he actually at one point, told us, hey, if you're interested to kind of get a feel of playing live and on a stage, you guys can come up on a Sunday afternoon to rehearse for a few hours to just kind of get a feel of playing in a hall kind of thing instead of, at home, so, or in the basement, which I think at that point, that's what we were doing as a band.
Yeah.
So, once Frank had reached out, I remember we did some rehearsals, at that club in that hall. And not too long after that, probably like at the end of the summer of 77, I think it was in September, we started kind of like getting the word out that, okay, it was a new band forming kind of thing, polka country musicians. And then I want to say our first live gig in front of, the general public was in September 1977. And that's how it formed together over that period of time. Like I said, it was probably like a good several month period in there, probably like early spring into, when we finally had our first gig.
So was it called Polka Country Musicians when you started, even if it was a honky style band?
Yeah, ironically enough. And it actually, the name of the band actually became more suited to what the band did, probably like more than 10 years onward after we started the band.
So speaking about that, when did you pick up the violin? Because you never really talked about that as an instrument yet.
Yeah, violin was like one of those things where actually it was sort of in a way out of necessity. We had at the time, we were playing like I said, 5-piece honky, and we had a guy in the band on bass who also played, electric piano. So for the non-polka stuff, he would go over to piano, and I usually went to like trumpet, and we'd have like, 2 trumpet players, and then have the guy who played clarinet and sax with us, he plays sax. And yeah, it just became a thing where, the couple guys in the band, between the bass player really wanted to get more into like the non-polka stuff. And, the guy playing trumpet and clarinet, clarinet and sax, he was more of a sax player.
Okay.
So they were more trying to push the band into being like more of like a variety band. And we're like, okay, to get the occasional wedding, that's nice, but we want to continue with the polkas because that's where our bread and butter was in the schedule. And there was, I remember, a little bit of back and forth tug of war. And then probably like not too long after the beginning of 1979, we actually came in contact with Tommy Chunas, who plays accordion and also plays violin. So he sat in, I remember, on a couple of gigs with us playing strictly violin. And then when he found out he played accordion, that sort of, you know, I remember, you know, my brother was pretty interested in going 6-piece at that point, knowing that, you know, we're getting pushback from the other guys, wanted to do like more of like become sort of like maybe like a wedding band that happened to play polkas, whereas we wanted to be strictly mostly a polka band. And once we found out Tom played accordion, we decided, oh, let's go 6-piece. So when they saw the accordion come in, they pretty much knew that, okay, this is the route that they're going to take here. So we're just going to kind of back off and kind of go in a separate direction and kind of leave the band. And then at that point, the bass player left and the guy on clarinet sax left. So we needed a trumpet player and we needed a bass player. And at that point, Tommy knew Frank Urbanovich, and you know, Frank played some bass and also played violin. So once he came into the band, now we have 2 violin players, and then we ended up picking up a trumpet player. So, you know, we went pretty much at that point. It's like, okay, now we're going to be a push style Polish polka band kind of thing. And then of course back then with the 2 violin players, though, okay, you guys want to do violin? Oh yeah, we'll do violin. So they were kind of out doing the whole thing with the, you know, a la Canadian fiddlesticks, and even before that, Eddie Gutsa's Polish Canadians with, you know, playing a violin, jumping up and down kind of thing, you know, just putting on a show. And so with that said, they were with the band for a couple of years, and basically after a couple of years, you know, we started hearing some rumors that they were kind of looking to leave polka country. So at that point, we kind of sat down and said, well, if this is going to happen, you know, we're kind of at a crossroads. It's like, well, if these guys who are going to play violin are going to be leaving the band, you know, do we just continue along the way and get other guys to replace them and kind of not do that thing anymore? And of course, by this time, with them being with us for a couple of years, you know, we sort of got the reputation. You'd say polka country musicians, and oh yeah, the guys with the fiddles. So that's, you know, kind of became what we were associated with at the time. So at that point, you know, we kind of said, well, if we're going to kind of continue, then we should probably, you know, do something about this whole thing of what we're going to do for the violin stuff. So it was one of those things where, okay, and well, back even like when, you know, Tommy and Frank were still with the band, it's like, you know, I go to Tommy and, you know, hey, show me a little bit on the accordion. I was always, you know, new instruments was just like a thing for me. It's like, let me see if I can get something out of this. It was always like a challenge. So, you know, he kind of gave me the whole thing of the circle of fifths on the left hand with, okay, the right hand's just like a piano kind of thing. And then, well, what about the violin over there? So he kind of, you know, gave me a couple pointers. Okay, here's, you know, a D chord, you know, here's the tuning on the strings kind of thing. And, you know, yeah, pick it up, kind of mess with it a little bit every once in a while. So it's not like that I was totally unfamiliar with it. At least I had like a general basis to go off of.
Okay.
So at that point, once we heard that they were, you know, possibly going to leave the band, which they eventually did like a few months later, it was one of those deals. Hey, we still want to do this. Okay, let's go out, get a couple violins. It was like one of those things where, okay, we don't know where we're leaving, so we got to get this thing kind of up and running behind the scenes. And that's kind of like what we did. So, yeah, I have to sit there and kind of, you know, hammer through kind of figuring out, you know, lead parts and, you know, where the fingering was going to be and all this other stuff. And again, that was just, you know, on my own, trial by fire. Let's just go. Put a seat in my pants. And yeah, like I said, it's a good thing I'm blessed with, you know, two good ears, because if not, we would have been dead in the water at that point.
Yeah.
As far as like continuing that and obviously going with that until today.
Cool. That's pretty cool. So who was your polka hero growing up? You mentioned Happy Louie, you mentioned Dick Pillar, obviously you mentioned Jerry Darlak, you mentioned Blazonczyk to a point. So who was that polka hero that you had?
Well, probably the very first one right off the bat, it was Happy Louie. I mean, no doubt there,
Yeah.
because I mean, he was definitely the first polka band I ever saw live. And again, my parents, after I was born, they kind of ducked out for like a year or two, really not going to many places. And then when they would go, they would hire a babysitter to babysit me.
Okay.
And then I started asking like too many questions when they would go out. As everyone's getting dressed up to go on a Saturday night, and I started asking, "Well, where are you going?" And then when I found out where they were going, I wanted to go.
Okay.
So, so they were in a rock and a hard place at that point, because of the fact that, well, yeah, we're going to take this 2, 3-year-old kid out, to a dance. And back then on a Saturday night, it was nothing to have a dance running, 9 o'clock till 1 in the morning.
Yeah.
And we're going to have, and everyone's going to mind like this 2, 3-year-old kid. So they kind of came to a compromise, and they said, okay, when summer comes and, we got the picnics in the area, you know, we'll bring you out and you can see, some live polka music. So uh, it was at Pulaski Park in Three Rivers. Happy Louie's playing in the summer. And it's okay, we're going to go. And my parents didn't know what they were going to expect when the music started playing. So we were at a table way at the back of the pavilion.
Yeah.
And as soon as Happy Louie starts, all of a sudden my attention, and I'm like looking, I'm pointing, I'm like, hey, I want to see that kind of thing. I think I actually got up on the picnic on the picnic table itself, and actually got myself up from the seat part, and actually, wanted to get up on the
Yeah.
table and see like, hey, what's going on up there? And once and of course I'm up on the table, I'm grooving to the music, and my parents are like, okay, he likes it. So then at that point, I think they might have picked me up and started taking me closer, and then, get a little bit closer to the action kind of thing. And pretty much at that point, I was hooked.
Nice. So,
Yeah.
well, then Blazonczyk was obviously a big influence on you also, because I mean, you've recorded so many Blazonczyk songs recently. How did you get to have Blazonczyk as that hero?
Yeah, that was from actually seeing him at Ocean Beach when Dick Pillar used to run Polka Bration down there. And I
Okay.
mean, back in that era, that festival would run 10, 11 days.
Yeah.
So, and he had bands from all over the country.
Yeah.
So you could go down there and see a whole bunch of bands. And for me, that was sort of like a music clinic,
Yeah.
because I was so exposed to everyone from Happy Louie to Eddie Blazonczyk to Marion Losh to, I mean, all different sorts of bands. And I mean, I was taught to polka dance at a young age too, but my focus was always, if the band's playing, I'm going to be up in front of the stage. And that was like one thing, I guess, throughout the years, like growing up at that young age, my parents never had to worry about where I was in the building. They knew if I wasn't in the bathroom,
Yeah.
then I was up right by the stage in front of the band watching whoever play. So that was never an issue as far as where they would look for me. Because
Yeah.
if if it wasn't in front of the stage, then I was was off in the bathroom, and I'd be right back by the stage.
Yeah.
So yeah, and actually, I mean, seeing the Versatones play for the first time, I want to say it was like probably 1974, 1975 maybe. Um, and I mean, just that band with Lenny Gomolka, Jerry Chocolate and Junior Wojciak, Jerry Darlak, Bobby Zima on drums. I mean, that was just like an eye opener. And of course, Eddie on bass, and his voice and everything. It was just wow. Uh, it was phenomenal. So yeah, he's been an influence as well. Uh, and I actually really, when you get down to it, those are probably the two biggest influences, I think, for myself and my brother.
Yeah.
Um, are those two definitely?
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I think Blazonczyk definitely was an influence for a lot of people. That's for sure.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
So one thing I learned about playing next to you is kind of learning about all the songs you've done. You have wrote so many songs, and to this day, some of the songs that we play, I don't even know if you wrote them or if it's a standard or what. So how do you like? Well, first of all, do you know how many songs you've recorded in your history of playing? Or no, do you know how many songs you've written in the history of playing polka country?
It's definitely over 50.
Okay.
Um, And actually, because when we first started the band, my brother was involved in the writing process too. He lyrics and get, sort of like a sort of a melody going, and then he would kind of, he had an idea for the song. We kind of like sit down, and then I would kind of like help him hone out the melody,
Okay.
uh, get the chord progression going, kind of thing. Really wasn't until later on, probably I want to say probably until like the early '90s, where I decided, I'm going to take a stab at maybe starting to write some songs.
Okay.
And it's like one of those things. It's like developing a muscle. At first, you try, and sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. It's sort of a hit or miss, but the more you work the muscle, the more you're able to refine it, kind of get it going a little bit so that it operates better. Um, and as time goes on and you kind of immerse yourself into it, then personally, I find myself coming up with more ideas that, even just for the sake of, hey, I got an idea for something, I'm not sure where it's going to go, but just to either get it down, either record it or whatever, hum it, like in these days with technology, hum the melody into the phone and record it, kind of thing, to save for later, because you never know when it might come in handy.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, really looking at it, yeah, I kind of came to the songwriting thing, I guess, kind of later than maybe, I would say doing it on my own later than
Okay.
maybe what most people would think. Because, like I said, up to that point, my brother was sort of, involved in, songs that we wrote and, you know, ended up recording. So it really wasn't until, like I said, like early '90s, like Back in Town, I think is like, well, I mean, the song Polka Country's Back in Town is one that I wrote. The Waltz on that album, The Last Waltz, again, it's another one I wrote. And that was like my first foray into songwriting, as it were.
Okay.
And yeah, and as time goes on, yeah, it's just one of those things where, it was difficult at first, but as the years sort of like have been going by, it has gotten easier. And I think some of it's mental, because it was always a thing of, well, if the song's only going to be 3 minutes, it's like, okay, what am I going to say lyrically? And sort of kind of getting tensed up about, how is everything going to, flow or roll out or whatever. But one thing that's sort of on my side is, even now, it's like I read a lot, whether it's fiction or science fiction or history or whatever. So I know I have the vocabulary. So now I look at it, there's more than one way to get around a phrase of what I want to say. If it doesn't
Mhm.
work this way, let's reframe it. Let's rephrase a vocal lyric to have it go this way.
Okay.
And developing, I think, well, for me personally, that was a challenge early on. But then when I started to realize, hey, it doesn't have to necessarily say this and try to fit like a square peg into a, round hole, kind of thing. Yeah, I can, I kind of developed in my mind of, okay, if I can't say it like this, well, let's try to, reconfigure it to sort of say the same thing, maybe not exactly what the original intent was that I was kind of thinking as I was kind of putting lyrics down.
Yeah. Cool. Now, when you come up with songs, do you normally come up with the words first? Like, are you just thinking of words and then you fit melody in after that? Or is it like sometimes you have a melody and then you try to fit the words back in? Or like, how does that work?
That is mostly something when it comes to songwriting. I usually come up with the lyrics first. Oh, I'm sorry,
Okay.
music first. What am I saying? Music
Okay.
first. Yeah. Um, and typically, like the way I will hear something, if I get an idea, is I will hear um, mostly the chorus first in my
Okay.
head, and sometimes I'll hear what is known, in the songwriting realm as the hook of the song, which
Yeah.
basically is sort of like, that's basically going to be the title of the song. And sometimes I will hear that with the melody playing, and I'll sort of grab onto that and be, okay, that's where the hook is. Okay. and sort of try to form off of that. And like usually the chorus will come first, like I said, and then off of that I'll try to build, you know, a verse, you know, and if it'll fit in there, put a bridge in, and sort of get that all together first, and then start. Sometimes the lyrics will come a little bit as I'm coming up with the other verses, you know, as I'm writing the melody and the chord structure for the verses or whatever. But usually to complete it, you know, for the most part, the lyrics come at the tail end. It's, I mean, it's very rare. I mean, sometimes I'll come up with, you know, something that'll stick with me, like a lyric line. One that I can think of, like right off the top of my head, is "Did I have fun last night?" That was just like one of those things. Oh, did I have fun last night? And I had it for a few years and just kind of kept it in the back of my head. And you know, then one day it kind of came back. Did I have fun? Yeah, kind of like make a cool song.
Okay.
And that sort of happened, yeah, kind of like in reverse of, okay, I got a title of a song. Now I'm going to write a song around that idea of what that's going to be the hook. But usually that's sort of rare for me. It's probably like over 90% of the time, the, you know, melody and chords will come first for, you know, it's usually a chorus, and then start building off of that.
Cool. So speaking about songs, I mean, you've recorded so many songs, so many albums. What was one of your favorite songs you've recorded in your whole life?
Oh God, I mean, there's a few of them. Because I mean, there are some that our band is known for, like in, you know, like in recent memory, you know, "Get Your Groove On," "Party for Two," and then I don't know. Every once in a while, I'll come and I'll write what's called like the stealth hit, or like the sleeper song, and it's in some cases I like playing those. Like a typical example in like one I can think of off the top of my head is a song like "Let Her Go" off of our Whoop Up recording. It's not a song that people will come screaming to the stage. That's what they want to hear. But it's a song that, you know, some people will come up and be like, hey, what, can you do that song? You know, yeah, sure. And we'll play it. Another song that's like that is off our Hard at Play recording. And actually there are a few people who do request this one, and it's called "What Might Have Been." And again, it's not exactly, you know, it's not a lead cut or anything, but it's one of those songs. It's a strong tune.
Mm-hmm.
And just like "Let Her Go" is, I would consider a strong tune as well. And there are people who will come up and, you know, like I said, they're not coming up in droves or anything, but you know, you get a couple of people that come up and, hey, can you do that song? And that's why it's sort of been put in the repertoire, and you'll hear it at a lot of our gigs.
Yeah. Cool. So let me ask you this question. Do you like playing the covers also, or do you like playing your original tunes? Like the Chicken Frieds and the How Do You Like Me Nows, or would you rather be playing the originals like Let It Go?
No, I think it amounts to crowd reaction. If this is the tunes that the people want to hear, and you know, and that's one of the reasons why they're coming to see the band. So I think it plays both ways. If we got a song that, you know, I wrote that happens to catch on, great. If there's something that we've covered in the past that people want to hear, that's great too. It's a matter about going out there and making a good time for everyone who's there.
Yep, I think that's absolutely true. So talking about the band, so what is one of your wackiest or most memorable band stories?
Well, something that's sort of like more G-rated.
Yeah, we have to keep
there
it
are
G-rated.
some moments that are pretty
yeah, keep it G-rated.
Yeah, that probably wouldn't be fit for like all audiences, shall we say. The one that comes to mind, I remember, this is back in the 1980s, and we had, we had the schedule of playing like the public events and Polish clubs and everything. And we were like more at that point, it's sort of like a regional band. We played through New England, upstate New York, New Jersey, Long Island, into like Eastern Pennsylvania. That was sort of our main footprint of where we would play. So we had a wedding locally, and we were, we had, the non-polka music repertoire that was actually pretty good. So we get our schedule of weddings here and there. And there was this one wedding that we ended up playing. And just to kind of like give you a background of that era, you had at that point, when it came to kind of like divvying up the expenses of the wedding, typically the parents of the bride would pay for the band. Mm-hmm. So what would end up happening would be the parents of the bride would say, well, we're Polish. We had a polka band at our wedding. So guess what, daughter? You're going to have a polka band at your wedding. Which sometimes a daughter would, oh, dad, do we have to, kind of thing. And what would end up happening is they would bring, the fiance along with the daughter out, and they would come see us, and they would hear like the mix of music, and they'd be like, okay, we can live with this. There were some times where we would get tense though at weddings, where we'd go and, the only polka you'd hear for like about the first couple of hours was the Polish wedding marches are coming through the door. And then, of course, you'd have the dinner music while everyone's sort of eating. And of course, that's all non-polka. It's all, slow stuff and just kind of mellowed out and everything. And then, of course, after that, then you'd have the first dance with the bride and groom. And that's, again, non-polka. And then, everyone out on the dance floor, you do like a couple more slow tunes. And then, okay, now we're going to switch over to the polkas. And that was always thing, it was kind of end up on pins and needles, because you start playing the polkas and you never knew what was going to happen at that point. It could go either way. You could play like two polkas, and then you'd have somebody from the groom side of the family come over and say, what's this polka stuff? Go back and play the other stuff. Yeah. And we go and we switch back. And I remember there were a couple times where, there was this volume back and forth when we got through like, the first dance with the bride and groom and stuff, and we were like going back and forth. And then finally, I remember there was like one instance where the father of bride came up and says, look, I'm paying the bill here, so you guys are gonna play polkas. You're like, okay, not a problem. And then when the other side of the family would come over and be like, okay, you point to the father of groom, go talk to him. But I kind of like tell you that story to kind of set up this other wedding that we played, which was kind of a little bit wacky. And it was funny because same scenario, Polish side for the bride, and of course they hired us. And I think I want to say the bride being the fiance, they had seen us too, and they were fine with it. So we started playing, and we did the typical Polish wedding march through the door. We do the dinner music and stuff, and then the first dance with the bride and groom after dinner, and everything's going well. And then, we switch over the polkas, and then all of a sudden it's like everyone's having a great time. And we start doing our thing, and everyone's into it. Everyone's, boy, this is a great party. And it got to a point after like about 3.5 hours, and we're scheduled to play 4 hours, where the father, the bride comes up and said, hey, we got the hall for the extra hour. You guys interested in sticking around and playing the extra hour? We'll pay you. And for us, it was a local gig at the time. So we're like, yeah, sure, we'll stick around. So end up playing, an extra hour. 5 hours are up. Okay, everyone's having a great time. All right, great. This is like one of the best weddings we've ever been to. People are had a good time and everything. So event ends, and everyone's kind of leaving the hall, and still they're kind of at the back of the hall. And there was like this foyer area right outside the hall before you hit the main doors to get outside. And everyone's kind of like out there in the foyer area with those that are left over. Most of the people had left at that point, but there were still probably, I'd say, 15, 20 people maybe left that were kind of like, they're still socializing. And we had pretty much at this time broken down like all the equipment, and then literally we were like taking it out the door. And all of a sudden I remember being in the hall, and we were like at the opposite end of the hall from the entrance. All of a sudden we were hearing like this scuffle out in the foyer area. What the heck's going on? turns out there's a fight breaking out between the groomsmen. Here it is after, like, we've been together like all afternoon and evening,
Yeah.
played 5 hours, everyone had a great time, and all of a sudden there's like a fight breaking out between the groomsmen. And we just like, we're picking up our stuff, we're just kind of like walking out the hall past it, and there's like these two guys, one guy's got the other guy in a headlock kind of thing, and they were going at it too. This wasn't playing around, and we're just like, we got to get out of here.
Wow. That's funny. That would be great to see.
Yeah.
So so of all the places you play, what's one of your favorite places to play? Or throughout the years? Like, think back of all the years playing with Polka Country and all the other bands. What's one of the favorite places you had to play?
There's probably a couple of them. One of them is definitely like the Wisconsin area. I mean, also I'd also put Minnesota into that category as well. It is the crowd. I mean, driving, like, we have to, you from Pennsylvania, myself from Connecticut. I mean, those people really appreciate, our band at least going out there and, to entertain everybody, to provide music and stuff like that. And we always get a positive reaction or response out there. And I would definitely be remiss if I didn't say Cleveland, because I mean, in a way, with the first live and jam recording, I mean, that really just blew the doors open for us, when we decided to do that recording in Cleveland. And so I have to say those two areas especially, for us at least as a band, are probably, I can't pick one over the other, but I'd say those would be tied for the top spot.
I was going to ask you, like, what do you like most about traveling? But you kind of answered it right there. And people say to me all the time, like, why do you like driving to Minnesota or Wisconsin? And you said it, just the reaction. It kind of makes the whole drive worth it. And you might drive 2 days, take off work and do that stuff. But when you get there, you forget about that drive, and it's just that reaction from the crowd. And I assume you feel the same way, because that's definitely the way I feel.
Yeah. And getting up there in that environment and playing, there's no other feeling like that in the world. I mean, when you come down to it, and I think that's something that really, looking for as many years as I've been doing this now, which, more than I care to admit, to be honest. But that keeps me going. It really does, to be out there playing live in front of people, interacting with them on that level of, performing for them, and, just being out there and, being up on stage and just, giving it hell. I mean, no better way to explain it.
I have friends that play in rock bands, and they play some pretty nice gigs, like at Hard Rock Cafe in New York City and stuff like that. But when they see us and the reaction we get when we drive to Wisconsin, they're actually jealous because of the reaction that we have with the crowd. And when they go and play some of these venues, they don't have that same thing. Like, yeah, it's hard rock, but they're just a band. They're a band at a location, and you don't have that personal connection like I think we get when we go to a place like Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that makes polka music unique. And I've commented on this through the years, is that we may be up there playing, but musicians in the polka field, for the most part, are very approachable, and it's sort of like, in this type of music that we call polka music, it's you can have that one-on-one interaction. There's no hierarchy of, oh my God, we can't go talk to them, they're like this band kind of thing. And I think that's one thing that makes it so unique. And it's probably like one of those things that, I think, speaking as, a musician going out there and performing, that it's kind of cool that, women that can be, up on stage, and, the band's kicking along, and okay, the set ends, you get off the stage, and, you start talking to people or whatever. And it's like, that kind of goes with the downtime of, okay,
Yeah.
you're up on stage and you're up there for like an hour or 45 minutes, whatever the case might be. You can come off the stage, just kind of like, woo, okay. Hey,
Yeah,
how you doing? And just start a conversation with whoever.
exactly. I definitely agree with that. So as we start winding this down, a couple more questions. One, so what do you think sets you apart in polka music?
Oh God. Well, I don't know if I have an answer to that, to be honest with you, because, between, I don't know, versatility, singing, songwriting, recording, all that stuff. I don't know. It's like that old saying, which I think is good as a moving target is harder to hit.
Yeah.
Um, and I never really try to. I guess one thing is I never try to really pigeonhole myself into being just like one thing. I guess would be a good way to answer that question. Um, because being involved in music at such a young age and trying to learn different instruments along the way. You're looking at arranging different songs, songwriting. There's always something left to kind of explore.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it. So I don't try to you know I guess do I have some things that are fortes? Yeah, I guess. But I'd rather let other people be the judge of that than
Yeah.
me, and try to give I know it's not really a straight hard answer, but um yeah,
No, I think you answered it well. I know standing next to you for all the years I have, just the amount of things I learned from you. So one of the things that I think sets you apart is almost being a mentor out there to people and just things that I've learned just by standing next to you and every instrument you play, no matter if it's trumpet, concertina, bass, or whatever. I mean, that's one thing that I definitely got by standing next to you for so many years.
oh, cool.
So yes. So with that, so what is your greatest achievement in your polka career?
Oh golly. Um I guess, I mean, like the amount of awards that the band has won over the years between both the United States Polka Association, the International Polka Association, um actually even going as far as back as the United Polka Association out of Chicago.
Yeah.
I remember winning an award from them back like in the early 2000s. That it's always good to be acknowledged and recognized. Um, and I think through the years, and not just me as an individual, I think the band has been blessed that we've been in that position of being acknowledged as much as we have through the years.
Nice. Yeah, cool. So finally, final question. So what kind of advice do you give young people out there trying to start a band or trying to follow in your footsteps to play polkas? What's the one thing you would give them?
I would say um, you're never done learning. You might think you are, but if you really come to a point where hey, I got my instrument down, I know what I'm doing. No, you don't. You're not trying hard enough, in my opinion. To this day, taking like the two instruments that I've been playing the longest, trumpet, concertina, there are still other ways of looking at playing the instrument. There are other ways of, hey, on these parts here, what harmony can I play that I haven't really done yet? What kind of solo? What can I do on this solo that I can change? What can I change up? How can I play a part differently? What can I do better on a vocal? How can I change the styling around on this vocal that maybe kind of embellish it a little bit to something that, you know, people have heard us play the song for years. And wow, I never heard him sing it that way before.
Yeah.
To me, in and that's one thing that's kind of really kept me going is between, figuring out different instruments or even to the technical aspect of audio, there's always something new to learn. You're never done learning. And I would say to anyone out there, don't limit yourself, and it's okay to pursue every avenue that you can to try to gain that knowledge, to make you better, either, whether it's training your ears, whether it's trying to sing better, whether it's trying to get more proficient on your instrument, or, songwriting, whatever it is. There's a myriad of things that, personally, is I try to think about or explore at some point to say, okay, even on a specific song, what can I do here? And as maybe as minute as that may seem in the scope of things, when you start, or when I start exploring that kind of thing, I know it's like I'm further progressing. There's something there to be added,
Yeah.
and in a way, it's like, for me, it's like I feel like I'm never done. It's a continuing process, but it can be an enjoyable one. And it's definitely, that's the advice I would give, is to, don't stop learning, and keep pursuing all that you can to try to learn to get better.
That's very good advice. I would definitely agree with what you have to say. So that's definitely good advice for people. So, all right, Wally. Well, hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. This was fun, fascinating. I even learned some stuff, even though I've been with you for several years now, but I learned some. So thank you for taking the time out for doing this for the IPA, and hopefully we could get on the road soon in Plain, Wisconsin.
Yeah, hopefully, and thanks for having me on the interview.
Cool. Thanks, Wally. Have a good day.
You too.